It's good to have you, good to see you this morning. If you have been with us for the last at least 6 weeks, a month and a half, you have seen this before. And I have typically brought this rod, or staff, if you want to use the biblical terms, of Moses, or if you want to just call it a stick, which it is, all of those, primarily because of what it symbolizes to our conversations. Now, today, specifically on a Sunday like this, the fact that it's Easter Sunday, Resurrection Sunday, and the very fact that you see the evidences on the screen, where Friday I had the privilege to host 14 young men between 6th grade and 12th grade at our home. Now let me introduce to you how this happened, and because of me spending the night with these guys at home, really forced me to use this just to kind of get around, because I am literally tired. And I'll explain to you what I mean by that. Okay, so here we go. Let me talk to you about this for a second. A week ago, now, I'm not complaining, okay? But this is church, to be honest, right? So just hear my heart. A week ago, the ladies from our youth group, which means middle school and high school, they prepared their own lock-in or Friday night thingy. Now, I was all for that because it wasn't going to be a mouse. So I said, go right ahead. Because I have a 9th grader and I have an 11th grader at home, 2 girls. And you know, girls, when they get together, things really change. Like when you have girls around, the dynamics change in every single meaning and word. So Danny and Deanna Smith, they were gracious enough to host it. Now, this is what I found out over the weekend at the Smith's house with, I don't know how many kids, I think they were like 14, 15 young ladies. Deanna and Danny went to sleep at night. Because with girls, you typically don't have a lot of physical things going on. But when you get 14 boys, things are different. Things smell different. After they play basketball outside for a while. And they come into the house, and they're going to spend the whole night at your house. So you know, I'm hosting the whole thing. We have a couple of volunteers in there, adult volunteers, and everything is good. And it's going really, really fun. But at the same time, it's just dawned on me. I'm there with the kids and the excitement. My son, I have a 12, almost 13-year-old boy, which is part of the group, and he's going crazy with all these friends and all these guys around. And you know, every single parent that is driving to my house to drop off a kid, they left with a huge smile. And for some reason, I'm not the one smiling. Everybody smiled except me. And so we're going through the whole thing, and then within a few minutes of just receiving all these boys at home, it just dawned on me. And I was reminded of something that we are about to do ourselves when you look at the elements that we partake the Lord's Supper. See, what happens is, you guys know this, every single time you bring someone into your house, the dynamics change. Now, typically, I will introduce to you the terminology of what is called refrigerator rights. If you've heard me before, you know what I'm talking about. Which implies, when you have a guest at home, you typically do not allow any guest just to go and open the refrigerator and say, hey, what do you have for, to drink or to eat? You typically politely wait until you are offered water, coffee, whatever. If you get someone that walks into the house and just goes straight to the fridge, he's like, hey, stop, bro. Nobody gets into my fridge. No, I mean, it's like, unless it's your mother or your mother-in-law, which they typically own the fridge. But anyways, so here's the point. The point is that these 14 boys, they don't know the rules, man. They don't know that what I just explained to you. They don't know that you don't get the refrigerator right away. These boys, they just came and they had an agenda. And the agenda was that we're going to have fun at any cost, at any price. And we're together and we're going to seize the moment. So they did. And they did a very good job. But here's the thing. Once they got there and I saw them with this ability to just make it themselves home, which is cool, that's fine, I realized that intimacy, connectedness, when you go deeper into relationships, unavoidably, increases the possibilities of hurt and pain and suffering. Translation, the deeper the love, the higher the possibility, and I'm going higher as I'm going low, but higher the possibility of deception, of betrayal, and things like that. So one of my favorite scenes of that evening is that we actually had a fire camp in the backyard. And the guys all together, there's marshmallows, and they're going through this whole, I mean, fires, they transform people. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but once fire is lit, things change. And I saw the behavior that I haven't seen in these boys in a long, long time. I saw their parents' behavior represented and expressed when I saw fire, when I saw them around this thing. So we're going through this fire thing, and then, they get the guitars, and they start worshiping Jesus. They start hearing and sharing the Word of God. They start literally doing this thing in community, and it's just beautiful. It's just amazing to see these guys lifting up their hands to God and worshiping. Some of these kids are crying and just sharing their hearts and testimonies of what God has done and is doing in their lives. But all of this, intimacy, remind me that once you go that intimate, once you go that personal, once again, the possibilities of, pain and hurt also come into the picture. So if you can just go with me for a moment into this experience of the upper room. It's called the upper room, which means this is the place where Jesus celebrated the Passover, the night he was betrayed. This is a celebration that you and I remember. This is from the book of Exodus. And the book of Exodus gives you 10 plagues. The very last one, the 10th of the plagues, is basically the angel of death coming over Egypt. And basically God saying to Moses, you have to get every single family, Jewish family, Hebrews, non-Hebrews, Egyptians, everybody is free and willing to sacrifice a lamb, a perfect lamb, no blemish, nothing wrong with the animal. Sacrifice it, get the blood, put it on the doorpost, and as the angel of death visits the city tonight, the firstborn will be spared. But if they don't have the blood, the firstborn gotta go. So here's what I want you to understand. That night gives you a glimpse of what happened this week in the country of Kenya. Do I need to remind you what happened in Kenya this week? 100 and how many? 145? How many were there? How many students were slaughtered this week? Okay, think about it. 150 people, young men, were killed. So you go and Google this, not right now, look at your phones. You go and Google these pictures and you'll see the grief, the pain, the mourning of these families because of this unconceivable experience to see your first child, or maybe your second child, maybe your third child. So something similar is happening on this day back in Egypt. And out of this event, when the angel of death shows up, the birth, the formation, the launching of a brand new nation called Israel, eventually called Israel, is on their way. Well, on that night when Jesus was betrayed, they were celebrating that event. See, here's the dichotomy of the conversation today. The dichotomy is that how do you use the word celebration with the word dead? How do you use the celebration? How do you come into this intimacy of the upper room, Jesus and his 12 inner circle experience, and actually celebrate the death of many? Well, here's the thing. What you got to remember is that, once again, intimacy, death, love can also potentially bring grief. So as Jesus is conveying this message to the disciples, I can only imagine how in their minds, because they were there, in their minds, they're going back and they're teaching that this oral tradition is passed on. How the first sermon, Jesus' first sermon, Matthew chapter 5, Matthew chapter 6, Matthew chapter 7. This is what is called the Sermon of the Mount. In the very first section of the Sermon of the Mount, which you and I know, we call this the Beatitudes. And Jesus gets up that first day. This is launching pad. This is when he's running for his election, and he goes up and makes these promises. And he basically says, blessed are those, and he's going through that. I can only imagine, in the intimacy of the upper room, in the intimacy of celebrating the Passover that we will call the Lord's Supper, and we will do in just a minute, I can only imagine these disciples going back into their mind to the early stages, to the early beginning of ministry. Because one of the statements that he makes in verse number 4 of Matthew 5 is a very nonsensical, meaning it goes beyond the senses statement. He says this, blessed are those who mourn. Because in my mind, my first reaction to this passage is, Jesus, if anybody knows about mourning, grief, is this people. This generation that you're speaking to 2,000 years ago, they knew about abuse, they knew about injustice, they knew about suffering. If you remember, between the last book of the Old Testament, which is Malachi, and the first book of the New Testament, Matthew, there is 400 years of no word from the Lord. In 400 years, 10 armies walked through these lands abusing these people. So if anybody knew about grief and mourning, and Jesus comes with this crazy message that says, blessed are those who mourn. Now, obviously, the second part of the verse says, this is why, because you will be comforted. So here's what I want to remind you. I've said this constantly, and I'm going to say it one more time. If you are visiting this morning, probably this is the first time you hear this. I hope that you get familiar with this as you come back and be with us. Here's what the Bible did not say. The Bible didn't say this. Blessed are those who avoid suffering. Blessed are those who, because of their faith, nothing wrong happens to them. Blessed are those who, because they're so close to Jesus, they are untouchable. That's not what this says. All that he says is that when you go, but when you go through mourning, you will receive comfort. That's all that's saying. That's all that he's promised. In other words, he will be with you. Well, here's the thing. In the moment where he's talking to the disciples in this upper room experience, and he's going through this whole thing of breaking the bread and passing up the cup, obviously, within the next few hours, these disciples are going to know some of the deepest suffering. They're going to feel, they're going to experience what you and I try to avoid most of the time, which is called betrayal. Their hopes, their desires, their dreams, their fulfillment. I mean, if you're honest, they have been following this man, not necessarily because he's coming back from the dead. They're following this man primarily because he promised that a new kingdom will be established. And obviously, this message of Jesus went over their head because they didn't get it. But the point is that as Jesus is sharing the elements, she's sharing this moment, Jesus makes a statement that is extremely profound. And part of the statement that he avoids in the statement is when he basically says, here's the bread, here's the cup, which those elements are well familiar for these Jewish boys. But there is one element that is missing for the first time in Jewish history. There is no lamb. Because for the first time, Jesus is, I am the lamb. Now they don't get it. They do not get it. Come on, they were men. You don't get it the first time. I saw it on Friday. I got 14 of them. Don't get it. But then, Jesus takes this whole thing a little higher and deeper again. Deeper, right? Deeper commitment, deeper the possibility to be betrayed. Jesus takes this huge risk by taking a towel and then a water container, and he goes around all 12, including the one that is going to set up the betrayal by the name of Judas, and he literally takes those feet and he washes the feet. And he takes this whole risk of intimacy relationship with the disciples, fully knowing that the same feet that he is cleaning, the same feet that he is washing, the same feet that he is serving are the same feet within the next few hours are going to be running for their lives because of the persecution. That to me makes no sense. I wouldn't do that. If I knew that you're going to betray me, if I knew that you're going to keep on backstabbing me, if I knew that, are you following me on this? Come on, man. This is only Jesus at his best. So coming back to Friday, I'm hanging